Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am your host Gyro. So, I finally finished A Realm Reborn ARR questline in Final Fantasy XIV. This is my very first character, White Mage. I am very impressed with what I've seen so far. I have some mixed impressions, some mixed feelings about different aspects of the game, and I know I've already published a few videos that were kind of mini-series documenting my journey as a newcomer from World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy XIV. Today it's time for us to summarize. Today is time for us to bring all of these impressions together on these particular topics that I've outlined here. So we'll be talking about leveling, dungeons, getting early game loot, questing, cutscenes, filler content, overall quality of the game, and finally my thoughts on flying. So in case you are impatient, no harm done. Please take a look at the chapters added in the description of the video and in the timeline in case you want to just fast forward and go to where you want to be. I'm super excited to share my further thoughts with you. Let's talk about it. So my friends, I'm kind of ready to step into Heaven's Ward, but at the moment I'd like to take a pause here and reflect on ARR before I move on, because there is a lot to reflect on. So how was my impression with the overall leveling in Final Fantasy XIV as a freshman coming from WoW? It was good. Overall I would say it was good. I would not call it absolutely mind-blowing or amazing, but I would say that the main story questline, MSQ, was easy enough to follow and gave a ton of experience, which definitely made the need to branch off and do side quests completely unnecessary, leaving those very comfortably for an optional pickup on my alt jobs when I'll inevitably start leveling those at some point. I do that stuff, I will continue doing that in Final Fantasy XIV as I did in WoW. I didn't rush per se, but started getting a little bit bored with what I've talked to you about in some of the previous videos, reading walls of text that seemed somewhat optional in some places. Yes, I've also read about 200 of almost identical comments telling me that someone, some characters come back and, and all of this is kind of setting up the world and setting up their background story. I've replied to all of you about the fact that it's more important to me, like you are right, but it's more important to me and any other arguably average Joe and Jane from World of Warcraft and any other place coming to Final Fantasy XIV to maintain the positive momentum and interest in the game, my friends, rather than to lose that interest. We're simply taking the lesser evil by skipping some stuff. So that is just to address that very, very popular topic right now in my comments. Now a word on group content and dungeons specifically. Generally very good, very positive impressions, and dungeons kind of started in a fairly basic way, as they do in both games, in World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV evidently, and I do appreciate the explanation that early dungeons of Final Fantasy XIV were created in the era of PS3, so obviously the detail is just not there. And I can see that even towards the end of ARR, they definitely lifted their game and they definitely improved quite a lot of stuff. Like Praetorium is, arguably almost a masterpiece compared to the first dungeons. And yes, I still keep in mind that I haven't seen anything yet. Haven't even seen the dungeons of Heaven's Ward, and there will be time for us to talk about that. Now the loot, the acquisition of the loot. Loot is good, borderline great. Yes, I said that it's not crazy exciting in my first impressions video, but that was literally the first couple of days into the game, and that reaction was caused by me simply not being used back then to the graphics and detail on the loot pieces back then. My eye was simply getting used to it, I think. By now, I think I have a slightly more all-rounded feeling about the loot in Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm quite okay with it. First of all, and the main reason for this kind of higher scoring on this aspect of the game, is that there are a lot of sources of loot. Starting from general quest rewards and dungeon drops and finishing with massive rewards from your job quest. I started it, obviously, but then got caught up in the MSQ along the way and forgot to basically finish it, and then ended up in a situation where my item level was too low to progress towards the final dungeons, 8-man dungeons of ARR content, asking you for help, asking you guys and girls for help, and you did. You were like, Gyro, have you done the job quest? And I was like, oh my god, I haven't finished my job quest. So thanks again to all of my people who put me back on track. That was quite exciting, and you know, your assistance as always means a lot. Now, speaking about cutscenes and cinematics, yes, we're getting into the dangerous, contentious territory of my commentary, so please keep in mind that it's all coming from a very good place and said with goodwill in mind. Cutscenes and cinematics, in my opinion, are very well orchestrated and executed, especially towards the very end of ARR, as I already mentioned, those final confrontations with villains and all of that. Some, keyword is some, of the cinematic questline dialogues are very, very, very slow and horribly drawn out. Yes, I once again hear you, my surely very well-wishing new friends in the comments who tell me that all of that is building characters and the world. I get it. But for a fresh person to Final Fantasy XIV, this seems like a horrible waste of time. Just accept it for what it is. Before I elaborate on this further, for those who are again new to this point of view and our ongoing community discussion, I deliberately won't call it a debate, because it's not a debate. Everyone is entitled to their opinions. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. But I'd like to give my special thanks and a random shout out to a particular community contributor, Maisie Solis, who clearly spent a lot of time explaining a very, very popular community viewpoint on talking to me about these, you know, boring and skippable content. So thank you, Maisie. I get the slightly purist approach, and I don't judge, but sadly a lot of you just don't see the angle that a newcomer to Final Fantasy XIV would experience, and that would turn a lot of us away. Now, expanding further on this point and specifically talking about ARR storyline itself, I'm yet to see what you are comparing that story to in Heaven's Ward, Shadowbringers and so on, saying that it's much better, it gets much better and less bloated with filler and so on. But I personally didn't mind ARR story at all. Other than that unnecessary filler that scares away newcomers that I already told you about. They arguably should make this initial highway into the depths of Final Fantasy XIV as a game smooth as butter, to cater for the sensitive flowers coming to Final Fantasy XIV from other games and trying to not lose interest in all the, you know, War and Peace tomes and tomes of quest dialogue. The whole story of the evil Sith Empire with Darth Vader at the helm deciding to invade a little planet of Jawas and Wookiees, it's all good. I totally followed and got the story. I'm kidding. Yes, I know, I was following Eorzea and everything. Yeah, Hydaelyn. All good. I'm just teasing you in a friendly way. But characters, I have to say, are very, very over the top. Unnatural. Other than the mechanic Sid, maybe, because he's okay. Their gestures, their movement is super exaggerated. Tataru from the Waking Sands says hello here. And all this requires a massive effort of getting used to. It is just what it is. I don't judge, I'm just expressing my honest opinion of a newcomer to you. And before you pointed out, yes, there is plenty of that over-the-topness in World of Warcraft, for example, too. Yeah, in places. But somehow, it's not that grotesque. And it's not that obvious sometimes. Or at least I think it's not. Here, everyone is either so jumping out of their pants happy to see me or hear some line of the dialogue, which just is like nothing, like doesn't mean anything, or is so super duper evil, like beyond imagination, like style, I'm so bad, like La Habria or whatever the name of that dude, the shady dude is, yeah? You know who I'm talking about. What I think is deliberate and very stylish, but over the top and requiring extra patience from me and might test you as a newcomer to Final Fantasy XIV from World of Warcraft or other places, is the attempted very pompous Old English speech. No matter who you talk to, high class of the society or some dock worker, okay? I think it's just less believable than it could be. Do you know what I mean? Like even, I'm sorry, angels in Diablo High Heavens talk more plainly and normally, like you'd expect to talk to someone who you share a world with, no matter where that entity came from. That's obviously very, very, very subjective, and you might love it or not mind it at all, but for me it's unnecessary, and most importantly, try hard. What I love particularly though is the whole set of Magitech references. I love that, and it seems so cyberpunky, and no, I don't mean that recent game from CD Projekt Red that failed miserably at launch recently, but I'm referring to the actual classic cyberpunk cultural style of clothing and gadgets that I'm referring to. Examples are too many to list here, and just those even long army swords in the Empire that basically are a gun at the same time are fantastic by design. You look at them and you think that totally could exist. Or even like the wrist guns of the bladed white baddie lady, I forgot her name. That's all just magnificent. Like, I love it personally. Talking about magnificence, let's talk about the overall quality of the game briefly, very briefly. It is once again amazing. I know I'm gushing here, but you know, I call it for what it is. What's good is good, what's not good is not good. I think the quality of the game is amazing. Everything seems to be rock solid to me, and it includes server stability, it includes actual animations other than the sliding across the dungeon floors, but we've talked about that to the death in the comments already. Beautiful design of the armor and clothing design. Models themselves, including the characters themselves, facial animations are okay for considering how old the game is, the ARR part of the game is, it's alright. And monsters wandering around the world, all the polygon counts and everything, I didn't count them on my fingers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's fantastic. Buildings, okay, flying ships, amazing, and all the other stuff. Now specifically here I have to call out the map. So the only big drawback on the accessibility of the game, I'm not even gonna say quality, I just think it's just UI design of the game, is the map. And I know it's kind of a very general statement rather than my impressions on ARR specifically. So minimap does the job and is pretty much the same as World of Warcraft minimap was. And yes, I'm comparing to what I'm used to, sorry. But the world map is very different. I like that it's resizable and movable, which is a great thing, and I think every MMORPG should have a resizable and movable map. That's a great feature without question. But it has way too many markers, way too many arrows leading out somewhere without any particular purpose. Yes, I know I can follow it, and I did on many occasions. It's not very easy to zoom all the way out and then back in to connect the distance between two very far removed points to basically just visually plot my journey from one place to another. It's not very easy to connect places for a beginner. So all I have to rely on are those open teleports and just basically teleport between places. That is kind of my impression here. So like, let's say if you've missed the line of the dialogue somewhere telling you how exactly you can get to the gold saucer area, right? Good luck just figuring it out for yourself, how to get there by looking at the map. Or looking for an exit from the city that's going to basically take you there, yeah? As a continuous MMORPG like World should give you an option to do so, if you even skipped on a more optional, on a more optimal rather than optional way to get there. And I know some will say, that's why you should read everything, Gyro, and I'll just laugh and ignore that, because I've already explained my view to the death on that, including all the points toward loss of interest, burnout, and getting bored. Finally, flying! As my people told me, don't stress, Gyro, just finish the questline and flying will unlock, mate. I was like, well, surely there is more to it. And nope, there wasn't anything to it. That was it. That was it. The developers who care about their community simply gave us flying, and that's it. At the end of the storyline, believe me. It's freaking awesome. Animation is great. The only problem I'm personally having are limited choices of flying mounts at this early game stage anyway, or maybe a mid game, it's not even early game anymore, probably, it's unfair to say that I'm early game. And also that my ostrich, right, looks really freaking weird when flying around with those tiny flappy wings and long heavy body that clearly was built to be running on the ground, right? It's kind of super funny though, and I am immensely grateful for, you know, to the developers of Square Enix and for them making it so easy and accessible and not harder than it needed to be. So that's beautiful, fantastic. So that is my thoughts. These are my thoughts on ARR. So summarizing it, as someone very smartly pointed out in the comments to one of the previous videos, the key difference between Final Fantasy XIV and, say, World of Warcraft is that in World of Warcraft you blast through the leveling to get to the end game, to get to the content of the end game. Here in Final Fantasy XIV, there is just game, as in there are end game activities, obviously, that I'm yet to see, that I'm yet to get to, but there is already so much to enjoy in the mid game, straight up, right now. And there is kind of no point to charge ahead other than just out of curiosity of seeing further storyline, new dungeons, cities, and so on. So with that in mind, my White Mage is now level 51 when I'm recording this. And while I'm enjoying healing a lot more in 8-man content than at the beginning of my Final Fantasy XIV journey, healing is still not my main thing to do, especially not being able to rely on mouse over macros. I personally want to tank, as I've mentioned in one of my previous videos, and right now, having flying unlocked, I'm gonna concentrate and take a pause in progression of my character, and I'm gonna concentrate on leveling my alt job of a Paladin Gladiator to keep reporting to you guys and girls on the progress, my differently changing perspective, impressions of tanking dungeons, that kind of stuff, and obviously working to understand the class enough to produce a specific focused guide for WoW Paladins perhaps, who want to understand Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV. So that's kind of one of my further mountains to climb in this game. So this and more side content, such as my thoughts on pet classes, coming up very soon. If this is your cup of tea and you aren't subscribed yet, but you enjoyed at least some of this narrative today, why not show your support and subscribe right now? You can always unsub later if you don't like the content I'm putting out. In the meantime, please keep commenting on my videos. Love talking to you, my friends. Thanks for all your support and emerging community friendships so far. I really value and appreciate all of it. I'll talk to you soon about something else Final Fantasy XIV related in a few days' time. But bye for now.